$5. That's all you're worth now, huh? $5 lousy dollars. The words cracked out of Sama's mouth like dry thunder. Her voice was raw from a night of no sleep, her fingers trembling as she folded the torn cardboard sign. One. Last time, the ink had bled in places. Dog for sale, $5 a free, the bottom corner smudged where tears had dried in silence. Behind her, the one-room shed groaned under the wind coming off the railway yard, tin roof rattling, floor stained with years of oil, rainwater, and memories she never asked for. The dog sat quietly by the wooden crate. He wasn't tied. He never needed to be. His name was Munir, though no one had ever asked. Munir meaning the one who illuminates, a name she had chosen during the blackest stretch of her life. 3 winters ago, she had found him whimpering inside a plastic paint bucket discarded in a pile of cement rubble near the old bridge. His paws had been raw, ears bitten nearly through by frost, but his eyes had shone like a lantern pulled from a cave. Now she couldn't even afford the rice husks that passed for dog food at the grain shop. The June heat had turned her breath sour, her limbs stiff. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. Since the laundry jobs dried up, since the auntie from Block 9 stopped returning her calls. Since the old man in the market warned her, no one pays for stories anymore, girl, just silence. She had borrowed from every neighbor she hadn't already disappointed, sold the bed, then the fan, the broken wristwatch her father once gave her, back when birthdays still meant something, and now Munir. She didn't look at him when she set the crate beside the roadside, just past the mosque wall where shadow kept things from spoiling too fast. A bus roared by, spewing dust. Her scarf flapped once, then fell limp on her shoulder. She gritted her teeth. $5, she muttered again, more to herself this time. Maybe someone will take pity. She had expected barking, resistance, maybe even a low growl of protest, but Munir remained still, only his tail moving gently, like he was waiting for a different plan to unfold. His ribs showed faintly under his coat, a dull copper brown now from months without meat, and yet his gaze remained unbroken, steady, like he could see through the sign, through the shed, through the debt and the hunger and the lie she kept telling herself. This isn't abandonment, it's kindness. By mid-morning 2 kids came close. They laughed and pointed. One of them asked if he bit. She shook her head and turned away. By noon, a fruit vendor offered a guava in exchange. She refused, not because she didn't want it, but because it would have meant trading Munir for a piece of something sweet. The heat pressed down harder, her stomach twisted with slow cramps. She sat on the curb, feet dusted in dirt, eyes hollow. She remembered suddenly the day Munir had dragged a discarded shawl from a trash pile and dropped it beside her when the cold had nearly taken her toes. He had slept with his spine pressed to her calves that night, not moving even when thunder shook the roof. Now, 3 years later, she was about to hand him away like expired bread. She closed her eyes. Then, without warning, the dog stood, opened them slowly, confused. He wasn't running. He wasn't moving toward anyone. Instead, Munir walked directly to her, past the crate, past the sign, and with a deliberate motion he set something down at her feet, a single folded paper bill, $5 old, crumpled, stained at the edge like it had been in a puddle or someone's pocket too long. Her throat locked. Munir, she whispered. He stepped back, tail still, chest rising, falling. She looked again. The bill was real, and then it hit her. This wasn't coincidence. He'd disappeared briefly at dawn, slipped under the rickety fence. She had assumed he was chasing a cat, or stretching. But no, he had returned with exactly what she had priced him at, like he was offering her his own worth, or maybe buying back his place beside her. Something inside her cracked open. She didn't cry like in the movies, no loud wailing, no dramatic scream. She just collapsed quietly, right there, beside the crate, knees to the ground, face in her palms. Her breath came in shallow, quivering waves. The $5 bill still fluttered beside her sandal, and Munir, he stepped close again and laid his head in her lap. Sama didn't know how long she had sat there, body folded on the curb like a paper bag left in the rain. The rough scent of rusted metal mixed with the warm stink of old oil from the nearby mechanic's pit. A tuk-tuk spluttered past, shaking the dust off the cardboard sign. The letters blurred now, half erased by heat, wind, and a shame that pressed deeper than hunger. She didn't lift her head, but her hand had curled tightly around the worn $5 bill, the one Munir had brought and placed with such impossible certainty. He was curled beside her still, body warm against her thigh, his breathing slow, but steady, as if nothing unusual had happened. But everything had changed. Her thoughts were scrambled and slow. How could a dog understand that number, that price, that insult? Had he seen the paper and known? No, that didn't make sense. It wasn't about logic. It was something else, something older than language, that strange thing animals carried when humans were falling apart, a loyalty that waited, not for answers, but for presence. But she couldn't keep him. The truth hadn't changed. That $5 miracle didn't wipe away the debt to the old woman who'd loaned her rice last week, or the month of rent hanging over her head like a cracked ceiling fan. Even now her landlord's nephew had begun circling their neighborhood, again, knocking doors with soft threats and polite cruelty. Still, her legs refused to move. It was like Munir had glued her to the earth. Then a shadow fell across her, a heavy one. She flinched. "You all right?" said a voice, male hoarse. Uncertain, she glanced up, blinking through sweat and sunlight. A man stood above her, early 40s maybe, with thick hands and a faded work shirt tucked awkwardly into second-hand jeans. He looked like someone who had spent his life lifting things heavier than he could afford to drop. Her lips parted, but no sound came. "I saw the sign. Dog for sale?" he asked again. Seema straightened her spine, quickly rubbing her cheeks dry with the back of her sleeve. She hated that vulnerability showed before dignity could. I changed my mind," she said stiffly. The man nodded slowly, then squatted down a few feet away, careful not to crowd her. "Did he bring you that money?" he asked, glancing at the crumpled bill in her hand. She blinked again, caught between suspicion and disbelief. "Don't look at me like I'm crazy," he added, not unkindly. "I've seen things, sister dogs that fetch medicines from shelves. One in my village used to guide an old blind tailor every day without being told. These creatures, they know." Something in his tone felt steadying, like he wasn't pitying her, just witnessing. Seema nodded once, but stayed silent. The man studied Munir, who lifted his head, ears barely flicking. "He's not just a mutt," the man murmured. "There's presence in him. You feel it too, don't you?" Seema's fingers tightened on the bill. Then, with a sudden gust of wind, the cardboard sign flipped fully onto its back. Exposed now, the words are free scrawled in small, slanted letters under the bold $5. The man's eyes lingered there. "I wasn't going to take him," he said gently. "Even if you said yes, I've got 2 mouths to feed already, and one of them's learning how to spell her name." His voice cracked just slightly. "But I saw you sitting like that and thought, maybe someone should stop. Just stop, that's all." Seema looked at him fully now. His expression wasn't kind, it was tired. But behind that, there was a flicker of something harder to name. Not sympathy, not charity, maybe recognition. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above breath. He stood, nodded once, and walked away without asking anything more. That night, Seema didn't sleep in the shed. She dragged the woven mat to the front patch of dry earth where the jasmine plant had once bloomed. The roof's edge didn't quite protect her from the open sky, but she wanted air, and she wanted Munir next to her, not locked behind old hinges. They ate half a chapati between them. She chewed slowly, tore pieces for him without a word. Munir didn't beg, he waited, eyes soft with the kind of patience only animals and certain kinds of pain ever learned. When the sky turned black, and the power failed in the entire block, she lay with her palm resting lightly on his ribs. His heartbeat was calm/steady, and for the first time in weeks, hers began to sync with it. In that quiet, her mind returned to something she had forgotten, a detail so small it had slipped past the edges of all the noise. 2 weeks ago, Munir had dragged something from the trash and laid it at her feet. She hadn't noticed what it was back then, distracted by hunger and fatigue. Now she remembered. A wallet. Old, broken but zipped shut. She had kicked it aside, thinking it belonged to one of the scrap boys or drunkards who passed through the alleys. But Munir had sat beside it for hours, guarding it like a bone. Seema stood quickly, heart hammering. She ran into the shed, pushing aside the crates, the old radio, the sack of torn clothes, and there, wedged behind a rusted bicycle frame, the wallet. She picked it up, breath held. Inside, a faded picture of a woman holding a baby, a folded prayer note, and tucked deep in the back slot, a wrapped roll of bills, crisp, unmarked. She counted it with shaking fingers. 840 rupees. Enough for rice, for lentils, for medicine, maybe even a call to the woman who used to sew clothes and still had clients. Her knees gave out again, but this time it wasn't from despair. It was the kind of collapse that comes when the storm breaks and for the first time in too long the earth offers shelter. She looked at Moon, and she finally understood. He hadn't just brought her $5, he had brought her time, a second chance, and now she would not waste it. The bill was still in her lap when she stirred. Not much time had passed. Yet something about the world felt different, like the air had thickened around her. Seema wiped her face, not because she had cried, but because she hadn't. That terrified her more. There had been no tears, just silence. Just that unbearable stillness when your heart breaks and forgets how to make noise about it. Munir remained at her side, not shifting, not panting, as though he knew too well that any wrong movement would splinter the moment beyond repair. His eyes, those deep, steady embers, watched her the way only someone who has seen your worst ever can. She placed a hand on his shoulder, fingers curling into his rough fur. It didn't feel like forgiveness, it felt like surrender. She didn't know what to do with the money. Part of her wanted to throw it away, to scream at the world for mocking her, sending a dog to teach her value. But another part, the quieter part, the part that used to write poems in the corners of laundry receipts, whispered, "He brought it to you." That single act had pierced something inside her no human kindness had ever reached. Not her mother's reluctant hands, not the promises of men who came and left with the wind, just this mangy, scarred dog with a bent ear and dust in his whiskers. But the world wasn't done. An engine rumbled in the distance, and Seema's heart tightened instinctively. No one came to this part of town unless they were lost or looking to take something. A moment later, a battered gray pickup rolled into view, tires crunching over broken glass and gravel. A man stepped out, sunglasses too clean for this part of the city, voice too casual. "Hey, you the one with the dog?" Seymour stood slowly. The crate and sign still sat by the curb like an open wound. She didn't respond. The man walked closer. He's still up for grabs. "I saw the post on the neighborhood board. Thought maybe I'd take him. $5, right? Bet him?" Munir let out a low, quiet growl. Nothing regressive, just a sound of knowing. Seymour looked down at him, then at the bill still resting by a sandal, then back at the man. "No," she said, the words small but solid. He raised an eyebrow. "What, he's not for sale?" The man blinked. "But the sign says he's not for sale," she repeated, louder this time. Her voice didn't shake. "Not anymore." The man scoffed. "You serious? It's $5. I'm not here to hurt him." Seymour stepped forward. "You don't understand. He's already paid for himself." There was a pause. A flicker of something uncertain passed over the man's face before he clicked his tongue and turned back to his truck. "Whatever. You people are weird," he muttered, slamming the door behind him. The engine stuttered back to life, then vanished down the road in a cloud of beige dust. As silence returned, Seymour exhaled slowly and looked down at Munir again. He didn't move. He didn't need to. She crouched beside him, lifted the bill, and tore it one straight down the middle. Half fluttered into her palm. The other she folded neatly and slid under the corner of the crate. Not out of bitterness, but as a marker, a grave for the part of herself that almost gave up. For the rest of the afternoon they sat side by side in the shade of the wall. Munir dozed with his chin on her thigh, while Seymour watched the cracks in the pavement, the shadows creeping longer, the street slowly waking as evening approached. In the distance, a woman argued with a vendor about bananas. A child shouted something about marbles. Life, indifferent as ever, moved forward, but inside Seymour, something had shifted. Not hope, no. Hope was still far, but maybe ... memory, to a kind that lives in the spine, not the brain. The kind that teaches you how to hold on when no one is holding you. Munir had not just saved her from shame. He had reminded her that dignity doesn't come from the weight in your pocket, but from what you're willing to protect even when it costs you everything. The $5 bill sat in her palm like a curse she didn't know how to lift. Seymour couldn't stop staring at it. The way it was folded, not crumpled, but carefully tucked at the corners, reminded her of how she used to fold her mother's scarf on Eid mornings. Back when the house still had more laughter than shadows, she sat on the roadside in stunned silence, the crate beside her empty. The cardboard sign now damped at the edge where a passing splash had kissed it. The wind had picked up, the sun was still high, but the day felt heavier. Munir lay next to her, his chin on the dirt, body curled slightly toward her as though to say, "I'm not going anywhere." She didn't understand it. Not fully, but something in her shifted. Something irreversible. Her throat ached, and when she finally tried to speak, the words cracked midair and vanished. All those weeks of hunger, the mounting pressure, the shame, the offers that stung more than silence. All of it had brought her here, and yet, the one soul she had been ready to give up had turned around and offered her a gift. Not money, not even survival. Just proof that he understood, and refused. The twist of emotion came not in the form of tears, but in memory. A single, quiet memory from the first week after she had found him, back when he was still more bone than dog. She had been sitting by the old railway siding with a torn packet of biscuits someone had thrown away, and instead of begging for them, Munir had pushed the packet closer to her with his nose, then curled up nearby and closed his eyes. Even then, he had been trying to give back more than he took. The world hadn't changed since then, but she had. Or maybe she had simply forgotten who she was. A shrill sound pulled her attention. The screech of bicycle brakes. A boy, maybe 15, skidded to a halt in front of her. Dust rose. He looked at Munir first, then at her, then at the faded sign. He pointed with his chin. "He yours?" She didn't respond. The question landed wrong. The boy swung a plastic bag off the handlebar. "My mum said to give this," he muttered. "She saw you sitting here since morning." Without waiting for a thank you, he placed the bag beside her and rode off. Seymour stared after him, stunned. Inside the bag, wrapped in a thin towel, were 2 boiled eggs, half a loaf of bread, and a small bottle of water. She turned to Munir. His ears, flicked. Something had changed. Not in the world, no. The rent was still due, and the grain shop still had nothing for her unless she paid in advance, but in the air around her, in how it moved, in how strangers had suddenly stopped averting their eyes. She broke the bread slowly, her hands trembling, half for him, half for her. When Munir took his portion, he didn't gulp it. He waited until she had eaten too. That's what undid her again, the quiet dignity. But it didn't stop there. As she stood to collect the crate, she noticed something tucked under it. Another note, not money this time, but paper, handwritten, ink smudged slightly from moisture. "Don't sell him, he's the only one who looked at me when I walked by. Zara." No address, no other words. Seymour blinked, holding the note to her chest. "A stranger." Another watcher, someone who had passed by and seen what no one else saw, or maybe what no one had the courage to stop for. The wind shifted again, softer now. The call to prayer rang out in the distance, echoing faintly through the alleyways. It didn't sound like an ending. It sounded like an invitation. Munir stood and shook the dust off his fur. Sema picked up the crate, broke the cardboard sign in half, and tossed it into the nearby bin. Her steps weren't hurried, but they were steady, like someone walking away from a decision that no longer belonged in her life. The road ahead was still uncertain. Hunger would return. Rent would knock again. But that day, June 12, 2025, would never leave her. It was the day her dog refused to be sold. The day strangers chose kindness over judgment. The day she collapsed not from weakness but from realizing she still mattered. And the day her dog paid $5 to remind her of it. That night, Sema didn't sleep on the crate floor. She didn't listen to the roof rattle in fear or bury herself under shame like a second skin. She sat beside Munir on the worn step of the shed, legs drawn in, back resting against the wall. The moon had climbed clean and full above the wires, softening the junk heaps and silencing the nearby barking. A kind of hush had fallen over the neighborhood, not peace exactly, but pause. She ran her fingers slowly through Munir's fur, feeling every coarse strand, every scarred patch. His head leaned gently against her knee, not seeking attention, just sharing presence. That $5 bill now rested on the shelf next to the broken clock and the half-burned candle, not as money as proof. It wasn't something she would ever spend. It was a reminder that even in her worst moment, someone had refused to leave her. Someone who didn't speak her language but understood her silence. In the days that followed, small things began to shift. The neighbor who used to turn away at the gate offered leftover rice from a wedding tray. An older woman from the next alley passed a bundle of stitched handkerchiefs through the fence, whispering that she could sell them in the Friday market. Then one morning, a man in a faded vest knocked quietly and asked if she still knew how to scrub blankets like she used to back when she worked at a laundry. He'd heard she was quiet and careful, and he had 3 children who ruined bedsheets weekly. Work didn't pour in, but it trickled, and that was enough. Enough to buy grain from Munir, enough to boil lentils at night, enough to hang her own washing line without borrowing from anyone. The old ache didn't vanish overnight. She still carried it, but it no longer dragged her down. Now it walked beside her like a companion she had learned not to hate. As summer deepened, Munir aged a little more. His limp grew slightly heavier, and his naps stretched longer into the day. But he was never far, whether she was hanging laundry or brushing the alley dust from her shoes. He was there, a quiet shadow with bright eyes and slow loyalty, and he still refused to leave the step unless she rose first. Then one morning, as a gray wind rolled in and flies buzzed lower than usual, Sema opened her door to find something folded neatly on the ground. A note, no envelope, just a scrap of lined paper weighted by a stone. I passed by again. I saw you smile. Thank you for keeping him. You didn't know it, but the day you almost gave him up, I was planning to give up, too. You changed both our minds. Zara. Sema didn't recognize the handwriting. She didn't need to. Her hand clutched the note tightly, and her breath caught with a quiet jolt. She looked down at Munir, who stared back like he already knew. That was when she understood the full shape of what had happened. It hadn't just been a dog saving a woman, or a woman keeping a dog. It had been a silent chain of small mercies. Strangers watching from shadows, notes written in passing, food passed through fences. One single act of defiance, a dog refusing to be priced, had rippled outward into lives she'd never see, reaching someone she'd never meet again. The crate now sat under a small cloth in the corner, used to hold scraps of thread and coins. The sign was gone, but the message lived on, not in the words but in the choice. She would never sell Munir, not for $5, not for $50, because he wasn't just a dog. He was the moment the world stopped walking past her.